Welcome to Dream, Declare, Deliver with your host, Chris Gorell. Join us each week as we explore how to live a life by design by applying the tools and techniques of emotional intelligence and personal transformation. Here's Chris.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Dream, Declare, Deliver. This is Chris Gorell, and I am blessed again to have a continuing conversation with Dr. Stacy Feiner, my good friend, and just brilliant colleague. And we always say this, but I just love our conversations and stuff. And we had done a recording fairly recently and had several key topics that we had come up with that I wanted to follow up on. We kind of, zoomed over them, and they were part of our conversation, and were, rich enough to come back and explore a little bit further. The one that I really wanted to start with is you do a lot of coaching with athletes. And I've done some with athletes, but, I really want to learn more about what you see as the distinctions that they have around emotions and emotional intelligence as it applies to the world of athleticism and performance. So, can we maybe start there and
Sure.
let's dive into
Chris.
that?
Sure.
Welcome.
Yeah. I wish I had gotten the Hawaiian memo. I have a couple of cool Hawaiian shirts that I could have worn too. Suffices to say, we could. So when you say, let me just, clarify, my work with athletes, elite athletes, Olympians, and professional athletes, really, I wouldn't qualify it as a lot. I would say it happened more late in my career, around the time of the pandemic, when there was the lockdown. And all of us suffered, most of us suffered from the lockdown,
Mm-hmm.
Athletes in particular, and they were in the news a lot. We were missing them. They were missing us. They couldn't keep up with their records and their numbers and their performance, and without those benchmarks, they suffered, because every day they're working towards improving their performance. So that disconnection from their team and et cetera.
So they weren't able to be with their team, which is one of their big sources of fuel. And weren't able to work out, and a lot of places were closed down where they could work out, so they're out on their own and stuff. So how big of a toll did that take?
Well, I think I would say that was devastating. They probably, I would say every single athlete was taken out of their context.
Mm-hmm.
Their sport was taken away, so that was their competition and their job,
Mm-hmm.
their exercising and practicing and working out and all of those things. Not only did they get better, but they also got a lot of emotional benefit from those activities.
Right.
Working on their teams, being isolated and depressed. And as a reminder, a lot of athletes who are working under a lot of pressures do, by their very nature, experience emotional stress, emotional distress. And then, of course, when you add on to that and those that natural context, the incidences or the situations of mental illness, where real depression and real anxiety and or diagnosable, then they really get exacerbated. So they were
kind of floating in space.
Very floating out. You know what I was thinking? They felt very caged.
Oh, more caged. I thought it was
Caged
like
and
right. So that was a whole different paradigm or a whole different context, and they just were so unfamiliar with it that it was a further distressor.
Yeah. Well, everything was taken away, right? Everything, their spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, social, that was, sports, when you're 100% into your sport, 20% of your life is all of these, frivolous activities like family,
Mm-hmm.
and like socializing. I mean, those things that we try to spend 50% of our time doing.
They don't.
Athletes aren't focused on those things, right?
No.
They're focused on all of the things that pertain to achieving their highest performance in sport.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I remember one of my favorite movies is Free Solo, and in Free Solo, there's kind of one of the storylines is Sonny, who is Alex's girlfriend. Kind of wanted to, she went into it thinking she would have a normal boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, and she very quickly found that as a professional, his whole life was dedicated to the rock wall, to climbing, and she had to take second seat to that, and so like they do have a different context, a different paradigm that they operate from. I was wondering, no, I'm sorry, just like something fired in my head. I remember when football started up in COVID, and the teams were able to at least get together, and they practiced with masks on, but they played the game, but they had canned audience applause in the stadium.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it felt so weird to me. And I wondered what they felt like, out there on that.
Yeah, I don't remember really having too much exposure or experience with those kind of conversations, but as observers and listening to some of the conversations, it was a little bit patronizing.
Mm-hmm,
it was a little bit it was really yucky, right? It was really more for the fans, right? Trying to get us back into the feeling of a real
right.
game.
You're part of a game, and you're part of an audience and stuff like that, and it just was so fake that it felt kind of like weird, slimy. And so I don't know if the players on the field, had that canned sound or not. I don't think so. But going back to what you were saying is, when that container got taken away and they were placed in this box, was there depression? What happened to their motivations and stuff?
I'll go back also to the situations that came forward for me, where I got private and personal calls from different players, not associated with their club,
Mm-hmm.
and they were willing to talk about and ready to talk about and needing to talk about emotions. And yes, in those situations they were feeling powerless, almost there was this embarrassment or shame that they were so dependent on this, this sport or this job that who were they with it just exposed them a lot to their own need for the sport, and when it was gone, how empty they were, or how unaccustomed they were to not having all of the aspects of their sport, that if you just took the sport away, they felt like they had nothing.
Right.
And then they were with their relationships, they were with their families, and one athlete said to his spouse said to him, we've been waiting for you to be home for years, and here you are home, and you can't even make time for us. You can't even get any energy for us to be with us because you're so depressed because you can't play. Just make it a sabbatical, make it make the best out of it. And that was also demoralizing. I mean, no blame on the spouse. That was her experience, and that was her attempt to get him activated and energized. But it didn't work, and in his mind, it made it worse for him because he couldn't find the energy. He couldn't find any joy from the circumstance. He didn't, and then there's all this ambivalence. When do we go back, and what rules do we abide by? And this is my last year. There was one athlete who didn't really, this was his last hurrah.
Yeah, right.
And so his last year in sport was at risk, and that was just devastating to him.
Devastating indeed.
And interestingly, it was interesting in that conversation. It was like, how many years have gone by where you haven't been present enough in the moment so that when you look back on it, it has real relevance.
So there's almost a remorse there too, like a sadness that is coming to an end. And this might be my last hurrah, and I might not even get a chance to do that. But then a remorse of like, when did I not take the opportunities and stuff? So you made a distinction in the last call of funk and slump. That the funk was really, they went into this emotional, this emotional funk. But there was also a slump in performance too that was associated with that.
Well, the way that's so interesting. I think it's a great distinction. I'd love to talk about it in the context of the call, just because I think it's an interesting, it's an interesting story about how a coach or a psychologist would kind of an intervention, right? So for the audience, this is what I was thinking when we were on the call. It was the first call with this athlete. He shared with me that his friend told him to call me and said, just tell Stacy you're in a funk. Just tell her you're in a funk. She'll know what to do, because he didn't know what he was going to say when he got on the phone with me. So he said, whatever. Tony told me to call you, and he told me to tell you that I was in a funk and you'd know what to do. So I didn't expect the call. So I was, I was a
no pressure at all, right?
And also, I wanted to, I also needed to come down from my own excitement that I was speaking to a celebrity. And I needed to remember that in this context, that was not his role. Right. And it was not my role to be a fan. So I had to, that was the first order of business. And then I needed, in order not to be over my heels with him, or get too excited, I just needed to temper myself. And I said, just give me a minute. Let me think about the best way to start this with you, because it feels a little, it could feel a little awkward. And I don't want to get too excited that I get a chance to explore these things with you. And I also don't want to make it so it's not important enough. So I said, let's start with, what's the difference between a funk and a slump? And what happened in that moment, and I thought it was a really good distinction, because he's a professional on slumps. He knows slumps, I don't.
Right.
That word has a lot more meaning to him and his life and his experiences. And funk meant a lot to me. I could understand the concept of funk perhaps a little bit better. So there we are now, just in a conversation, just like we're going to have a conversation about concepts. And how do these strange concepts mean? What do they mean to us? And then as it becomes more personal to what it means to us, then it will reveal the sorrow or the gap or the confusion, or then it requires the opportunity for exploration. And so that's how we got started. And I'm not the only person who repeats that story. He likes to repeat that story also. So I share that again because, when people enter into coaching, somehow they might forget that the coach has to, or the therapist, we have to acclimate too. It's not like we come in all knowing and the relationship is really simple for us. We have to find our way too.
Yeah, that's so true. I always said to people that I have to find the lovable part in the person that I'm coaching, because I have no leverage whatsoever other than attaching myself to some part of that person that I really want to see thrive. And so I called it looking for the lovable part, that I could attach to me to, that I would say, okay, so there's the skin in the game for me too. I'm not just this outside authority or observer or whatever. I actually have a relationship here with this person, and the relationship is
not funny. That's great. That to start the relationship right away with mutuality, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what you're saying. I hear is you had to find the place where you are comfortable in your role, and search that out, because coaching is a relationship, And, all we have is the relationship. We don't have authority. We're not their boss or their, athletic, team coach or, the owner of the team.
No, but we do have private information.
Yes, exactly. But that's part of the relationship. That only comes when you develop that relationship, that then they share that private information with you. And then we can get into the real meat of the matter. So,
that's interesting. If I can riff on that just a little bit about the development of a relationship, in a coaching relationship or a therapeutic relationship.
mm-hmm.
It's funny, when I used to coach financial advisors, wealth advisors, traders, and bankers,
those guys,
such investment. Back in the day, they'd swear a lot, and so I kind of picked up swearing. And one of the things that swearing got me when I was working with men was, oh, that's an HR issue. And I said, okay, so you have something on me. I'm going to have a lot on you. Now you have something on me. So you're saying that there was an emotional lovability between the two of you. And I'm saying, one of the ways that I gained equal footing with clients was when they had something on me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm not the only person who's carrying the precious information of you, but you have something on me too. So that keeps us honest also.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that happened with swearing.
Yeah.
Go figure, which I'm still a swearer.
That kind of was the badge, was, in the old boy days, when I was coaching senior execs, they would, for a man, they would test me by being, like, rah, 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 and how tough could you be? And I had to be as tough, back at them. And so that because like this, somehow that made me okay. Like if I didn't take their crap,
right.
And some of them were irascible. I mean, curmudgeons. I mean, there were some of those guys. Particularly,
so lovable was hard in those situations.
Lovable was hard for some of those things because like where do you like, yes, I can establish myself as a power player with you. I'll go knee to knee with anybody now, but I still need to develop the relationship that would allow me to coach you, and it's that human emotional connection that that I think is so important in coaching, that allows us to then have the leverage and just lean a little bit closer and say, but and I both know that's bullshit. So let's cut to the real issue. What is it really that's going on? And like right in there, and that's all relationship stuff,
Yeah.
So we were talking about funk and slump, so I got us off target there.
So I think in the context of just in that circumstance, the purpose of the funk and the slump was really for us both to have an expertise to bring to the conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know that we necessarily, explored it to the degree that maybe is, super relevant to the audience, though I know you did. You kind of talked about slump being a performance measurement and funk being an emotional state, which I think that holds water. I think that holds water. I think that's, but.
So that's the thing
Slumps come from distractions. So while you do mention that slump is kind of a measurement, the source of a slump is distraction, is a crisis of confidence, is so it is.
But that's all tied to the emotion, of the funk as well, and we were talking.
Well, that was the point.
Yeah, and we were talking before about one of the things that I really loved working with athletes about or what I loved about them that I found so workable was that while they're very aware of the result, the metric, they knew that the metric wasn't the target. It was their performance It was their day-to-day practice routine, their follow through, the way they left the pad or the first two strides off of the line of scrimmage. You got to keep the back low and to keep it low enough so that I had the speed and acceleration that I needed. They knew that those things made a tenth of a second difference in getting down the field or whatever. And you can measure that with the stopwatch, or you can measure that with the scoreboard, but they understand that it's not about that. And I think that so many people that we coach so often get hung up on the metrics as their results, and then they beat themselves up about their metrics and don't look at the internal inspection of,
right.
What is it that I'm actually doing? What's my attitude? What's my context? How am I approaching this? And unpacking that's where the coaching work really is fun to get into.
Well, it's fun for us for sure.
Yes, right.
I think athletes really like to look at it, the numbers are things, or the performance are things you feel like you control, right? They're something that's in your control. The emotions, the mindset, the feelings about what's going on your team, the dynamics that are going on, the distractions, the emotions, all of those. And also just the your mental state, not just your mind state, but actually the mental state, which really has lots to do with nutrition and food and chemical balances and all those things that happen physiologically also go into a player's moods and mindset. I think the space that mostly I spend with athletes is how these intangibles matter to their performance, how emotions and distractions and unresolved sense of yourself.
Yeah.
When you underperform, each athlete is going to have a different experience of what that underperformance means. Yeah. Some people will tell you that they disappointed their team. Some people will go into this negative thought. I shouldn't be here.
Right. Right.
So in those situations, that's kind of where the work led us. Was in that. And I would say that another way that the relationship was able to form substantially was what athletes know that business people don't know. Is they know that that coaching does help them, that they are better because of coaching.
Right.
And oftentimes they can't get as far if they don't have they won't get as far if they don't have a coach. I don't think that that's the interpretation in business. I don't think that's the relationship that many executives have with their coaches.
That's true. Yeah.
How that translates for an athlete is when they get 10 yards, when they move down the field 10 yards, when you give them an insight, when you discover something that's valuable to them, an insight that's valuable, that changes the way they see themselves or their sport or their team or their fans or their relationships or their relationship to any of those things, is, well, they become, they become excited and they use it. The first thing is they use the insight. Then the second thing is they thank me for the insight, and it's not for credit, it's for appreciation.
Yeah.
And athletes know when you appreciate them, you get more from a coach. That when you appreciate each other, you get more from each other.
Right.
And the third thing they do is they remind themselves, or remember you said that, coach? Remember you said that, coach?
Right.
Remember you said that? And they remind you so that they don't lose those 10 yards. So by the time you're ready for the next insight, the next insight comes along,
they're primed.
They're primed. They're not falling. They're not falling. They're only oriented towards the growth.
Right. Right.
Because they've reminded themselves every day of those things that help them get to the next level. So their mind is populated with, remember she said that, remember she said, remember we did that, remember how that happened?
Yeah.
So that when a new insight comes, they level that up. And essentially that's what growth is. I do remember an athlete said, what does growth mean? Like, what do you mean growth? What happens with growth? And of course, sometimes the easiest way to describe that is to say what it's not. Right? It's not falling below your baseline, right? It's not becoming more distressed. Yeah. Growth is becoming more confident, more self-aware, more informed, more composed, more willing, more capable of managing ambiguity, letting things unfold, recognizing, your own contribution to something and the contribution to the environment.
Yeah.
So I have always appreciated how what working with athletes taught me, so that I went back to my business clients and I said, this is what I expect.
Yeah.
This is how it works best. And that evolved and improved the relationships with my business clients.
Yeah. True. You like was remembering as you were saying about the kind of the depressive state that a lot of athletes felt during COVID is kind of similar to the post gold medal depression that a lot of Olympic athletes experience. And I want to put it in
anticlimactic. Right?
It's sort of anticlimactic, unless you have a certain attitude. So I was fortunate to make it to the World Championships of Taekwondo 2 years in a row. And so I'm sitting there with the current world champion, and I said, okay, Kenny, like coach me on this, because like this is new territory for me, it's like do or die. And he said, no. He said, what's that say on the back of my jacket? I said, world champion. He said, what's that mean? I said, that you're the best in the world. He said, no, it doesn't. He said, every person here is the best at this craft. It just means that on that day, at that particular time, I scored more points than the other guy. If I make it mean more than that, I get all messed up in my head. But when it's just today's performance, then I can go on to tomorrow and the next day, and I can still play this game. And so the context that he had around championships, by the way, I didn't win the world championship. I came in fourth, which means I lost twice. But
I can see your little shame and your little disappointment and
my little disappointment. Damn, I got almost all the way. A surprise may not have died.
But fourth wasn't. But even in retrospect, fourth isn't good enough for you.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, being top 10 in the world is pretty cool.
Okay, gotcha. I didn't hear that part of the story.
Oh no, it's just to be there and to be in the company of those other 9 athletes who, at the age that we were, we're all in our 60s, so we were in a class of athletes that were, had to be lifelong athletes. You can't compete on a world level if you haven't been taking care of this body the whole time, as you grew older. But the thing that I learned from Kenny, his name is Kenny Richardson, and he's a wonderful man. But the thing I learned from him was that this day is just another day. It's not the be all end all. So this is the championship. No, it's just another contest. And I may score more today than you, and you may score more today than me. It's no other day. There's no specialness to it. And that allowed him to continue playing the game, to continue competing in that. And I just thought it was so insightful. Wise and insightful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we've several times talked about the word context. And you had mentioned before in the last conversation, and I wrote it down that it's something I wanted to come back to, and maybe we can end up on this, the difference between context and control. So many people want to control the behavior or whatever. And it's really a matter of really shaping the context, the container, because can you say more about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, I think just right out of the gate, control is narrow, right? And context is wide. So, but just by definition, those words, they're distinct and completely different. And when you think about control, it's obviously more instructive, and it's more focused on very specific activities in a moment.
Right.
And
so
when you don't have,
No, so it has less degrees of freedom to it. It's very specific. You got to do this, 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 and, you know, like you're trying to control the behavior either of yourself or another person. And I'm hearing context is different, is more expansive.
Well, context is more networked, right? Context has multiple facets, and it's much more three-dimensional. It is three-dimensional context.
Got it. Yeah.
So so let's just think about what context is. One is, you know, what it is that you are. What do you bring? And again, to Kenny's point, each day you bring something slightly different. So in that particular day, what are you bringing? Or in this context, what are you bringing? What are the expectations that you have of others? What are the other people? What are they bringing on that day? And what are their expectations of themselves and of you? And then, of course, perhaps more broadly, what are the expectations? What are the outcome expectations? And who are they going to impact? And what's the ripple effect?
Yeah.
So I think when you think about context, it's the ecosystem that it's kind of Newton's law. You know, when one action is what is it? How does he say it?
For every action is the equal and opposite reaction. You know, yeah. So but it's also what you were saying about nutrition, you know, and all the other aspects. You know, the context is how I fuel my body and my mind and the attitudes. And, you know, it's not just the do this, get that, cause and effect kind of approach to getting things done. It's really a holistic, and as you said, three-dimensional view of how I be what I am being. And that shapes the doingness of it. So as we always say in coaching, it's be, do, have, not have, do, be. You know, it's who you're being that causes you to do different things or to do it differently that then produces different results that you have.
Right. And context is, you know, a lot having to do with perspective and internal interpretations of things. Right. And so that the more context you have, the better suited you are to organize the information and relate to it personally, and then interpret it in a way that perhaps allows you to be more effective or more you find more purpose and reward from an experience, and feel the kind of this emotional connection to the outcomes of the work you're doing and who it's impacting.
Right.
Yeah. So context always gives an individual more
tools,
more insight. And more insight into how to achieve. Really the benefit for all.
Great. What a perfect place to end. So we've run out of our time, and I love you to pieces, and I really appreciate your insights to this, and it's really been another great conversation. So blessings and love, and we'll see you around the next time.
Blessings and love to you too. See you, Chris.